teaching remotely is an odd experience because you're so removed from the reactions of the people you're speaking to. It's always like, you know, running a three-legged race or something for me. But glad to have it. Glad to have the option. And good to see you guys, all of you, even if today you are all flat Stanleys to me. So uh, maybe I'll hug you next week. We'll cross our fingers. Maybe I'll be back in Austin. So we're on the third lesson of the Judges, and this study continues to be an unflinching look at some early stories, but instructive stories for us. So let's start with the same opening prayer we've been using. If you'll pray with me, we'll get started. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who is faithful even when your people are faithless, who is mighty to redeem when your people are weak in every way, who is now working to set all things right and inviting us to participate. Teach us your ways, O Lord, as we study your word. Reshape us. Make us holy as you are holy. Amen.
Yeah.
Okay. Today we are in Judges chapters 4 and 5. And this will be kind of a tricky one because the story is told once in chapter 4 and once in chapter 5. And I'm going to try to meld it together for us so that we get a coherent telling of the story. Now, this is not based on any scholar's work. This is Karen trying to merge chapters 4 and 5. So I'll give it a shot and we'll see if it makes sense. Chapter 4 is a narrative telling of the events. Chapter 5 is poetry. It's a poetic telling of the events. And we get some details in chapter 4 and we get some details in chapter 5. And when I was first reading through the Bible, I was vastly confused, because it tells a story and then it tells a story. And it's not the way I think of things. I think of things chronologically in nice, neat order. And this gathering of snatches of things is odd to me. And in my Bible, it's all just printed, the same. There's no indication that this is a scrap from here and this is a scrap from there. Interestingly enough, the poem in Judges 5 is one of the oldest pieces of writing based on the archaic Hebrew in the Bible. So the Song of Deborah is a very old artifact of the 12 tribes history. And let me say that when I'm studying these things, I promised I would share some resources with you when I was on Zoom. Okay. I don't know if you can see this pile of books over here, but the Robert Alter translation from Hebrew is one of my go-to books. And let me just say that his translation of the Hebrew is very illuminating and sometimes eye-opening because he does not shy away from saying explicit things. So I don't convey all of those to you because I'm frankly not comfortable saying some of those things. So I've expurgated this to some degree just to enhance my comfort level in sharing with you. So forgive me for that. But I refer you to Robert Alter if you'd like to have the bland, no, not bland, the blunt presentation. Anyway, so here we are. We're in chapter 4 of Judges. We're talking about Deborah and Barak. I have to tell you that I was well into my 20s before I realized that there were women characters in the Bible. Uh, they just didn't come up in sermons much. And so, some of you who've done Bible study with me for a long time know that I went on a search for the women in the Bible and found that there are quite a few women in the Bible and really interesting women in the Bible. I think we did like a 2 or 3 year study where we studied a different woman every time. And that was really useful to me. I felt encouraged by that. So the story of Deborah is one of those favorite stories. So I'm not going to read the whole thing to you because I'm going to be telling you snatches from 4 and snatches from 5. But we start, and it's useful to look. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. They have rest with God during the life of the judge, and then as soon as the judge dies, they uh, again do evil. So the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Now, there really wasn't a king over a unified Canaan. There were lots and lots of Canaanites with different names, and some of the names you see in Judges are Canaanite sub-tribes. And Hazor was one of the most powerful cities in Canaan. And so, by virtue of Jabin being the leader of the city of Hazor, he was sort of by default the leader of the Canaanite tribes because his town was the most powerful. But um, he called the king of Canaan here. Later, he's called the king of Hazor. So you kind of get the idea that he's head of this fortress city. The commander of his army armed was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth, Hagoyah. The people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and he oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. Now, it seems to me that it's taking longer and longer for the people to call out to God. We saw an 8 year period before they called out. Then we saw an 18-year period before they called out. Now it's 20 years before they call out. This also supports my theory that this is not a circle, but it's a spiral down. So here's this leader, Jabin, who's got this army commander, Sisera, and they have 900 chariots clad with iron. And he's taking advantage of his power and he's oppressing the people. Now, I want to read you something out of this book. This is a new book. I bought this yesterday at Barnes and Noble. It's Battles of the Bible from AI to Masada. And it's fun because it's got color pictures in it. But aside from that, I am a little suspicious of some of the scholarship of this book, but there's an interesting passage I want to read to you. This is about the chariots. It says the Israelites were at a disadvantage against the Canaanites, as they had often been. Theirs was a tribal host composed mainly of men without armor, equipped with maybe spears, maybe shields, and in some cases, maybe swords. The Canaanites had infantry of the same sort, but were also lavishly equipped with chariots. The chariots of the time were fairly light and were not intended for close quarters combat. Instead, they could dash about the battlefield, acting as a mobile platform from which the crew would shoot their bows and throw javelins. This mobility allowed the Canaanites to bring extra firepower to bear where it was needed and to speed off when they were threatened, enabling their troops to avoid hand-to-hand assaults. There was also the psychological effect of a great many chariots thundering about, raising dust to inspire fear among their foes. All right. So they have a combination of firepower and mobility, and the Israelites are poorly armed. Imagine, I mean, these are volunteers who get called up to go into battle. And imagine, these people who are trying to learn to be farmers taking, farm implements with them, things they used in agriculture. We talked about Shamgar fighting with an ox goad. So the Israelites have very rudimentary weapons to face these Canaanites. So the name of this book is Battles of the Bible, and I recommend it for the photographs, but not necessarily for all the information. It's got some good maps and stuff in it. So there's that. So if you look over at the poem in chapter 5 in verses 6, 7, and 8, you find this. In the days of Shamgar. Oh, that's one thing that we haven't really talked a lot about. Some of the judges overlap with each other, which is also part of the reason that it's hard to date. But Deborah lives at the same time as Shamgar, probably in different parts of the country. The highways were abandoned. The travelers kept to the byways. The Canaanites were dashing around, ruling the area, and it disrupted the ability to travel on the roads from town to town. And it would have also disrupted the caravans, the trade. So the Canaanites were really causing a hardship to the Israelites. It says the villagers ceased in Israel. They ceased to be. Most of the Israelites lived out in the farmlands. They didn't live in the fortress cities. In some cases, they hadn't been able to take the fortress cities. But in some cases, they had taken them, and they chose to live in villages out near the land that they worked. But things got so bad that all the villagers retreated to the walled cities. So we've got a situation where the Israelites are severely impacted by the Canaanites. Interestingly, in verse 7, in the poem that Deborah tells, she says, I, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. Throughout this story, we're going to get allusions to motherly care. So that's interesting. It says, when new gods were chosen, then war was at the gates. When the people strayed away from God and chose other gods, then he handed them over to war. Was shield or spear to be seen among the 40,000 in Israel? And the answer is no, it wasn't. So we get that out of the poem. By the way, the NIV, instead of saying when new gods were chosen, the NIV says when new leaders were chosen. I don't quite know the reason for the NIV choosing that, but my Robert Alter says gods. So I'll go with the Hebrew expert on this one. Okay, so here we've got the Canaanites oppressing the Israelites. We've got a situation that has gotten worse and worse and worse. And first, they can't travel on the roads, and then they can't live in the villages, and the trade's cut off with the caravans, and it's just a mess. So, enter Deborah. Now, Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. All right, think a minute about how she's described. She's Deborah, a prophetess, which means that she's in touch with God, right? She hears the word of the Lord and shares it with the people. She's wife of Lapidoth, so mentions first her relationship with God, then her relationship with her husband, and she was judging Israel, her relationship with her community. Interesting that they're mentioned in that order. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. Okay, she's wise. She's helping them sort out things that aren't specifically addressed by the law. So she is hearing from God, she's wise, and she's well respected by the people who come to her for help. So one day she calls Barak. Tell Barak to come. I need to tell him a word from God. So Barak shows up and she says, Barak, good news. The Lord, the God of Israel, is commanding you. Go gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun. And I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand. All right. Deborah's probably excited about this. The Lord, Barak, good news. The Lord is going to take care of these pesky Canaanites for us. All right. So what do you think Barak's reaction is going to be? By golly, let's go. Right? No. He says, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. What? She's no military person. Why does he want her to go? Good question. Let's turn to another book. Here's another resource. This was the one that I was really excited to find when I agreed to teach this series. This is Timothy Keller's brand new book on Judges. I like Timothy Keller. The subtitle is my favorite thing about Judges so far. His subtitle is The Flawed and the Flawless, which I just think is a wonderful description of what's going on in Judges. But listen to what he says about Barak. Now, I have always heard this taught that Barak was a lily-livered coward, and he wouldn't go if Deborah didn't go. All right. Well, listen to what Timothy Keller says. He says, there are two ways of understanding Deborah and Barak's conversation. One is that Barak is lacking faith, and so although Deborah agrees to go with him, he won't get the honor of the victory because of his timid lack of faith in God's promise and command. Okay, hadn't read the rest of it. Deborah says, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you're going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Okay, so one way of looking at this is Barak had no faith, and so as punishment, he wouldn't get the glory of the win. Now, we know that he shouldn't be taking the glory of the win anyway. It ought to be glory to God, but he wouldn't be credited with the win, so to speak, militarily. But then listen to what Timothy Keller says next. He says the other option is that Barak is actually showing faith by asking Deborah, God's spokesperson, to go with him. And that when Deborah says, on the expedition you're taking, the honor will not be yours, she is making a statement about his future, not giving a verdict on his faith. You know, when the story gets told, you're not going to get the credit for it. She's not indicating that, it's a faith problem. She's just predicting that he's not going to get credit. So Timothy Keller says, I favor this latter reading because it fits better with Hebrews 11:32-34, where Barak is called a hero of the faith. And if you go over and look at Hebrews, there's at the end of the long stories about the heroes of faith, there's a verse that says, and what if I had time to also tell you about Barak and, Samson and Gideon? And so that, I thought that was interesting. So there's two ways to look at Barak here. Either he didn't trust God's promise, and he felt like he needed Deborah to make him feel strong enough to go do this. Or this other reading where he wants to make sure Deborah, who's got the connection to God, Deborah, who's getting a word from God and telling him what to do and how to do it, he wanted Deborah with him so he could hear from God. So you can choose what you prefer. This is Timothy Keller Judges, and it's a brand new book. It just came out after his passing, by the way. It was in the works before he died, and they just released it a couple of months ago. So we've got Barak, and he's wanting Deborah to go with him. So Deborah, without pause, says, yeah, go. But a woman is going to take credit for this victory. Now, in this reading, when you get there, you think, Deborah's going to get credit. But hold on, story's not that simple. So, Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. Kadesh, Gary, I think is the battle you were trying to remember when we were talking about Judges' battles on the first lesson. That's yes, a different battle than the one I was thinking of. But so they go to Kadesh. And Barak calls out Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 men went up at his heels, and Deborah went up with him. So they all go to Mount Tabor, which is there near Kadesh. Now, if you look at the poem, it gives more detail about who the fighting men were. And while Naphtali and Zebulun were the primary forces, and they're the ones that are in the area that's most dramatically affected by the Canaanites. One of these times, I'll hand out a map for you that shows where all the tribes were, but they are in the area that's most affected. So, it makes sense that all of their fighting men get involved. But then there are contingents from several other tribes that come in to help. So then down marched the remnants of the noble people of the Lord, marched down for me against the mighty. This is Deborah talking in the poem. From Ephraim, their root, they marched down into the valley, following you, Benjamin, with your kinsmen. There's some speculation that the Benjamites were great warriors, and so they acted as the leader of this coalition. From Maker marched down the commanders. From Zebulun, those who bear the lieutenant's staff. The princes of Issachar came with Deborah, and Issachar, faithful to Barak, into the valley. They rushed at his heels. Okay, so here's all of the fighting men who are gathered. And then the poem kind of pauses and talks about some of the tribes that didn't come. And there's kind of a sneer in these words. Among the clans of Reuben, there was great searching of heart. Why did you sit still among the sheepfolds to hear the whistling for the flocks? Among the clans of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. This is, according to Robert Alter, my Hebrew friend, this is akin to they sat and thought rather than taking any action. This might be they sat on their hands, or they were contemplating their navels over all of this and not doing anything. So they don't respond. And it says Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan, and Dan, why did he stay with the ships? Have no clue why there's a mention of ships here. Asher sat still at the coast of the sea, staying by his landings. So the other tribes didn't respond. We know that there's disunity among the tribes now, and here's more evidence of it. Verse 18 in the poem says, Zebulun is a people who risk their lives to the death, Naphtali too, on the heights of the field. So the poem gives a little more detail about exactly who's fighting here. So what happens is they all go to Mount Tabor, and they go up in the foothills of the mountain where the chariots can't get to them, because there's a river with a valley at the foot of the mountain, lowlands, and the chariots can run them up on the plains. So they're up in the foothills where they're safe. Okay, change of scene. Now, Heber, the Kenite, had separated from the Kenites. You'll remember they were mentioned in our first lesson. They're related to Moses, and they were settled down in the south part of the country, and they were allies of the Israelites. Heber, had pitched his tent as far away from the oak in Zanaim, which is near Kadesh. So he had moved away from his kinsmen up into the Canaanite territory, and apparently had forged an alliance with the Canaanites. In some of the verses about Heber, it says he's a metal worker. So he may have actually helped outfit the chariots. Don't know for sure, but it's an interesting thought. And so he's allied with the Canaanites. And he apparently is the one who tells Sisera that the Israelites are on the move. So when Sisera finds out that they've all gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera calls out all his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the men who were with him. And they go toward the river of Kishon. So here come all the chariots down on the plain. And, they They don't mind waiting for the Israelites to come down. They can't stay up there forever. In a way, they're trapped up on the mountain, right? So the Canaanites come down in the valley. And Deborah says to Barak, well, this is the day. The Lord has given Sisera into your hand. The Lord goes before you. Now, get up, go. It's time. And so Barak and his 10,000 soldiers get up and go. Now, mind you, this is pretty dangerous stuff. You got to have a lot of grit to go down out of the foothills onto the plains where the army is with the chariots. Because as we heard from my little reading, they're mobile. They can go all over everywhere. They can outrun the Israelites. And the Israelites don't have armaments, right? So this is very much an uneven situation. But Deborah tells them to go, and they go. So, I mean, you got to give these men points for faithfulness, which makes us incline maybe a little bit toward Tim Keller's reading of Barak, because they go down out of the mountain. Now, the chapter 4 doesn't tell us what happens. It just says in verse 15, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army before Barak by the edge of the sword. Okay, but in the poem, it tells us that as the Israelites sweep down out of the foothills into the valley, there arises a great thunderstorm and a rain, and it pours its buckets of rain all over the lowlands. And the river Kishon floods. And to this day, that area floods. It turns into a marshy muck swamp. Well, if you are on a chariot that's got iron on its wheels, you're going to start getting mired in this mud. You're going to get stuck. You're not going to be able to maneuver around very well. And these troops, as we heard, weren't really trained for hand-to-hand combat. They were trained to stand on this platform and shoot their enemies. So now you got this mess. You know, you got probably horses that are pulling the chariots, getting stuck in the mud and whinnying, and then the, men getting out trying to shove the chariots out of the mud, and then the Israelites attack them. And I mean, this is a mess of a battle. But the Lord hands them over to the Israelites. Okay. Just imagine all of the noise, the yelling, the panic. Oh, that's one thing I was going to tell you, panicking. In verse 15, where it says the Lord routed Sisera, the Hebrew word there is panic. Sisera was in a panic, and all of his soldiers were too. So Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot. I mean, you're just a sitting duck if you're standing there in your chariot and they come down out of the hills and they come sweeping down after you. So he gets out. He probably tried to get his chariot unstuck. There's, panic. And so he eventually abandons his chariot and runs away. Barak pursued the chariots and the army to Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. All right. So the Israelites, once they get the upper hand, they're probably able to take away some of the swords and spears from the Canaanites. They may have picked up some handy armament in the course of the battle, but they rout the army. Okay, so in the melee, Sisera gets away. Verse 17. Sisera fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin the king of Hazor and the house of Heber the Kenite. Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, now these words in Hebrew are very soothing words. Now, turn aside, my Lord. Turn aside to me. Do not be afraid. So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. He said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty. So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. Okay, now we were talking about motherly illusions. We've got Jael. She's talking soothing to him. Imagine her patting him on the shoulder and saying, there. Here, come in here, get warm. You're suffering from shock. No, not water. Here, some warm milk. Here, let me tuck you in. She's doing this motherly thing and tucking him in. And so he relaxes, right? He's among allies. And he's probably exhausted. And he says, stand at the opening of the tent, and if any man comes and asks you if I'm here, if anyone's here, say no. But Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. And then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. So he died. Don't you love those statements? So he died. Yeah, I bet. And behold, as Barak was pursuing Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said, now she's doing completely the opposite of what Sisera told her. Come, and I will show you the man whom you're seeking. So he went into her tent, and there lay Sisera dead, with a tent peg in his temple. Now, for people of a certain age, I cannot read this without hearing in my head, bang, bang, Maxwell silver hammer. I'm sorry. I can't. So on that day, God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the people of Israel. And the hand of the people of Israel pressed harder and harder against Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. And at the end of the poem, in chapter 5, it says the land had rest for 40 years. So Deborah and Barak had turned the tide against the Canaanites. Interestingly, at the end of the poem, the scene shifts to the Canaanite women. It's interesting, there's so many women in this story. But verse 28 shifts to the women back home in the Canaanite villages or cities, armed cities. And it says, out of the window she peered, the mother of Sisera wailed through the lattice. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of his chariots? Her wisest princes answered, they're comforting her. Indeed, she agrees and comforts herself. Have they not found and divided the spoil? A womb or two, a woman or two, a slave taken. 2 for every man, spoil of dyed materials for Sisera, spoil of dyed materials embroidered, 2 pieces of dyed work embroidered for the neck as spoil. So they're wondering why the Canaanites haven't come back, and they're comforting themselves by reminding each other how after battles, the men always bring back all of these glorious things from the people that they defeat. But we know Sisera is not coming back. So the poem ends with, so may all your enemies perish, O Lord, but your friends be like the sun as he rises in his might. So Deborah apparently wrote this song uh, immediately after the battle because it's, as I said, one of the oldest pieces of Hebrew in the collection. So there we have the story of Deborah. Do you like Deborah?
Yeah.
This has been another one of those times when I didn't let you talk. But next week, I'll be back in town and I'll let you contribute to the class. So with that, we'll close. Thank you.